Well, thank you for joining Wassim. I guess it would be great to get started hearing about some of your work with MIT Computational Law Journal and, what are the governance focuses you guys are having?
Yeah, hey everybody, nice to be here. Within that very weird biography is one of the roles that I have at the moment, which is I'm a technology editor at a quite informal interdisciplinary journal centered around law at the MIT Media Lab. And what we do in that journal is we're trying to map out novel horizons for the future of laws and regulation, given, the shifting paradigms of technology. So one of the things that I'm doing there is I write an editorial column where I'm doing a kind of a chronological survey of blockchain governance from 2009 to the present. And just about to drop is the 2014 to 19 edition, which I call the dark ages of blockchain governance. I've been thinking a lot about the ways that we try to use technology to overcome social problems in that most general sense. And so this session follows on really nicely from other internet's work on DAOs and labor, I think.
So would be super interested to hear more about that and what threads you have been pulling on from this early 2014 to 2019 period that relates to some of the wheels we keep reinventing and issues that we keep experiencing over time.
Yeah, we really see some echoes through history. And, I think that there's lots of things that are interesting and novel about blockchains. But one thing they're not capable of is overcoming human challenges and social problems. I think we know that by now. I don't want to go over some of the cases and examples that have been litigated to death. We're in this room. We all know about the history of Ethereum and the DAO and Ethereum Classic and Cody's Law. I don't want to go into that. I think there's a very interesting prior example, which is very underexplored, which would be an amazing case study for a up-and-coming researcher to delve into, which is the Bitcoin-like cryptocurrency called Dash, which started off as X11 coin, was also then called Dark Coin, and then became Dash. I think it's still around. I mean, it was really, when I first found this space in 2013, shortly after that, it was one of the major top 10 cryptocurrencies. It's not there anymore. So the innovation or the advancement, the kind of novel tweak on Bitcoin as a fork of it, as a derivative of it, that Dash introduced was masternodes, which bear some resemblance to the staking nodes that we have in Ethereum and other Web3 platforms today. The idea being you would take 1,000 of your Dash coins, lock them up, render them liquid in your node, and then you would become a masternode. So imagine, we sometimes talk about cryptocurrencies as pyramid schemes. Imagine a ziggurat, a stepped pyramid. So now we're creating, we've now got a multi-tiered system of power. And so if you would lock up 1,000 Dash, you would create a masternode. You would then engage in some responsibilities on the network. Dash was positioned as a privacy coin. I mean, it wasn't really, but that's how it was marketed. And so you would do some kind of naive coin mixing on behalf of the network, and there was a private send function. And so that was one of the things you would do, and then you would get a portion of the rewards from the block to do those kinds of activities. There was also a Dash DAO, inverted commas, Dash DAO. And in that, so 10% of the block rewards from Dash, it was a proof of work network with proof of stake as well. But 10% of the proof of work rewards would go into this treasury, and then people would use this kind of tried and tested idea of proposals and up and voting them, and then there's allocations of money or Dash coins and stuff like that. So I was at a Bitcoin conference in 2018 in Lisbon, and just having a cigarette out there outside the venue, the hackathon. I was building some tools for humanitarian applications of Bitcoin at the time. I'm a little bit more skeptical that Bitcoin has a humanitarian dimension these days, let's say. And I met a Dash core developer smoking a cigarette outside, and I told him I was interested in the governance of smaller networks, and he just immediately trauma dumped on me I didn't ask, he just trauma dumped on me. And he said, there's this messed up thing happening in our network. There's a bunch of, the proposal system is broken. A bunch of kind of bad value, shitty proposals, pardon my French, were getting upvoted and passed through, and the good ones were getting declined. And we'd looked into this a bit more. What it turned out to be was a cartel was forming in front of us. We were watching the formation of a cartel, or at least the kind of cementing of control of a shadow power structure in this network. And so imagine these overpriced proposals go through, and then the people that control the master nodes, oh, by the way, I should tell you, each master node gets one vote in the Dash DAO. So if these overpriced proposals go through, the cartel gets more Dash, they get more master nodes, they get more votes in the DAO, and the process repeats itself as the epochs of the treasury funding system go through. So we're literally watching the frog boiling in the waters of centralization there.
Yeah. So I'd be interested to know, kind of what lessons you drew from that as a groundwork for this misadventures in governance theme. Especially that we can apply now as we try to do better learning from the past few years. Yeah,
there's some eternal themes in here. Indeed, other internet just touched on some of them. We're talking about informal power structures and hierarchies. That's what was going on here. So the reason that the insiders had control of the network without it being kind of completely explicit was that we used to have this concept of an instamine on proof-of-work networks. The idea that at the beginning, the launch of the network, the difficulty of mining would be set artificially low. So the people that found the network at launch that were pointing their hash rate at it would clean up, get loads of coins. And so it looks like the insiders got a lot of coins, and then they used that to kind of cement their control. What they could have done is they could have started again. They could have done a fair launch. You could just start again if you mess things up, but they did not. And so the lesson, I think, is that there's always this shadow possibility, the potentials of shadow implicit hierarchies and power structures embedded within these networks. And the technology sometimes serves additional mechanisms to obfuscate those hierarchies, those power structures, those influences, whether they're hard power or soft power. So I think the more complicated these systems get, both the kind of the protocols themselves in a technical sense, architectural sense, but also in terms of the governance mechanisms that we build into them, the more information asymmetry there is between the people that design them or that know how they work and everybody else. And then there's in that gap, there is the place for arbitrage of power. And so that is my take home from all of this, really.
Yeah, one question that brings to mind also relating into the last talk is, at least with the kind of DAO structures that we see these days, there's a strong feeling of collaboration and a sense of community, or at least a sense of belonging to something intentional. Like back in the days of these proto DAOs, were people kind of familiar with who the other folks were? What was the uniting factor between their participation?
Yeah, okay, I'm going to start with a hot take, which I just kept popped into my head in the last talk, which is all of the signaling around communities in this space. There was this tension alluded to in the previous talk as well, that it's socialism in the streets, but capitalism in between the sheets. That we like to signal that these things are all being done in an altruistic, in a pure way, but the reality is these token networks have speculative objects embedded within them at the very core. And that guides a lot of the behaviors that we see. It's not everybody, right? You guys are nice, but there's other people using these networks. We can't control who uses them. It's permissionless, right? The word community, I think, is a loaded term. And I think we need to think about what those words mean to us before we throw them around loosely. So I was having a conversation with, so I'm writing a book at the moment on imbrications between technology, capital, and divinity. And the series editor of that is a Marxist sociology professor. I won't name him. He's Canadian, and Canada is dealing with the demons of the country's formation and the way that First Nations people were treated. And so the interesting example he gave is that the word community seems to have two sets of invocations. There's a bifurcation in the meaning of that word. We can talk about our community in a kind of a virtuous, in a benign way, but sometimes when you hear people talk about the other communities or the communities of the other, the LGBT community, the black community, the Middle Eastern community. My friend, who will go nameless, suggests that you could substitute the word community for savages in that case. So I just want you to all be very careful about how you use this word. Where's the camera? Is it there? Yeah. Also you watching at home, well, you watching at home, be very careful about how you use this word, please.
Okay, well, I guess in the kind of usage of that in this question, and also flowing into the kind of pot stirring example that we identified as kind of the next point in this narrative, I guess I meant community there in terms of like knowing who the other people are and having like, there was all this drama about people pushing forward these proposals, but like, was there a unifying goal of what like the proposals were for, I guess, in there? Because that's the kind of distinction that I'm interested in making between the proto-DAO's day to, these early DAOs and to where we are now, where it's like super individual brand building, like in that left quadrant.
Yeah, I mean, so just for those of you that aren't that familiar with Dash, or like as it was 5-8 years ago, it was positioning itself as a payments network. Like they were basically trying to be PayPal, but on the blockchain. So everything they were funding was like corny, cringe marketing stuff. They funded like awful songs. I mean, you can find them on YouTube. They're awful. I mean, like terrible stuff. So it was all marketing stuff, YouTube tutorials, outreach stuff. Some of it was well-meaning, like, we want to do a Dash bus and drive around the global south and, bring civilization to the communities there. So a lot of it was well-meaning, but also a lot of it was cynical and like, just very obviously, capitalistic in its intent.
Yeah, that's very interesting to keep in mind.
Sound familiar?
Yeah, I would be curious to see, what they're getting up to now. But yeah, so and kind of looking in this, through this historical narrative, then you identified some other points that we can learn from and draw, beginning to draw a pattern about, if you would be interested in chatting about some of those.
Sure. Okay, I've got like a laundry list here of things like grievances that I've accumulated over the last decade. Can we say something about the word protocol and what protocols mean to us? Because I think it's helpful, because it's another word that, in technical parlances, it did have some kind of specific meaning, but we have really used that word so heavily in this space that I'm not even sure I know what it means to people. So there is a tweet from James Prestwich, very smart developer, from 2019. It's one of my favorite tweets of all time. I'm going to read it to you verbatim. Protocol is a code word for bad middleware with my token in it. So please don't use the word protocol like that. And I had a very interesting conversation yesterday at the speakers' dinner with Jaya Clara Brecker and Andrea Leiter, where we were talking about Coder's law and protocols, and like whether protocols should be ossified, whether they should be rigid and fixed, to the end of time, or whether they should be mutable and malleable. I think those are also things we need to think about, because if you intend these things to be, to live forever, unchangingly, the world changes, people change, things change. And if your thing doesn't change and it can't change, then we're going to have to overthrow it rather than like adapt with it. So like also have a think about that. Can we talk about Coder's law real quick? Yeah, okay, so this concept, I mean, by the way, full disclosure, I was a member of the DAO in 2016, and I was on the Coder's law side. And so I ended up in the Ethereum Classic community. You can find videos of me at the Ethereum Classic Summit in Seoul in 2018 on panels about immutability and censorship resistance and giving talks about how great Coder's law was. So like, people can also change. People should not be ossified. People are also mutable. We contain multitudes. So this idea of Coder's law, I mean, let's talk about the law, right? The law changes. Like laws of nations do change. They're not fixed and immutable. So if Coder's law really meant Coder's law, the code would change, the protocols would change. But somehow we managed to bastardize that term to mean that it will never change. And so I think that is some kind of like incredible, mental gymnastics. I was going to say intellectual gymnastics, but I don't think that's the right word. But yes, so that's another bugbear. Thank you for letting me rant.
Yeah, so what you said about protocols changing reminds me of actually an interesting point that you and Laura made at another talk that I saw y'all do at the Spike exhibit about whether DAOs are, like, is the success of a DAO measured by its longevity and scaling, or, is there something to be said for DAOs that are intentionally sunsetted? And I was wondering if you could speak a bit about that and the relationship between DAOs and protocols as, not
Sure. I mean,
necessarily
also, again, other internet, covered this really neatly in their survey, where it seems like a lot of people do want to see sunsets, graceful degradations of these things. By the way, I've been arguing for graceful degradations of DAOs for at least 5 years in public. And what I think is a good example, and I think it maybe had been touched on, pop upon in the speed run we got just now, was railroad corporations that built the states. They had a mission-specific purpose: connect infrastructure between these two places, and then when it's built, you dissolve the organization, you return the value to the shareholders if there's any excess, and then some other mission-specific, goal-driven organization might emerge when there's a new mission. Because if you don't do that, then you just end up with these institutions that just don't really have a purpose. And the problem with that is, once you've got an institution, all it really cares about is preserving itself. Doesn't give a shit about what's outside it, really. So if we want to avoid that and take a look at the world around you, that's what we've got. So if we want to avoid recreating that, I think it's quite important to think about what comes after we build these things.
Totally. So yeah, final topic to cover. Earlier in this discussion, then you were mentioning being aware of community parentheses pejorative meaning, and also you have been very vocal about people in our community, specifically your projects or just overarching narratives falling into this greenwashing category, and introducing a concept of community washing that I think is really important to keep in mind as we all collaboratively are defining what public goods means and what commonsing means. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about this critical eye toward community washing, how we can avoid that, and how we can move forward with integrity.
Right. Well, we already talked about communities as a kind of a exploitable commodity in a sense. We think of them. I sometimes feel that the people that invoke the notion of community in an abstract sense in Web3, not you guys, the others, they sometimes talk about the communities as if they're a commoditizable resource to be exploited. And I've been on the receiving end of that exploitation a few times. So let's not name any names in here, because they are perhaps in the room. But there are things which are meant to be, novel ways of fundraising for altruistic projects. But once you join their communities, then you become part of the resource which is attempted to be exploited from. So there's community washing, there's greenwashing in these kinds of things as well, where we talk about the virtues of regeneration and sustainability and whatever, carbon neutrality. But then for very relatively small amounts of money, we're allowing extractive capitalist, petrochemical corporations to launder their reputations in this domain. And I don't think that's very smart. So please stop doing it.
That is not necessarily the direction I thought that question would go, but it is useful to have a critic's view. So.
Did I say that out loud?
Anyways, that's going to be the censored part of the video, but yes. To wrap up from that in our last minute, what are you actually excited about seeing in the space? And if you were to direct a focus toward a non-extractive and positive direction, where would you envision that as going?
I mean, look, there's still a lot of potential in these technologies to do really interesting experiments and to exemplify new kinds of modes of collaboration. Maybe we can move beyond logics of scarcity. Maybe we can do truly post-capitalist experiments and maybe make them real. So I want to see more of that. Let's try and move beyond the logics of scarcity, because we're in this metaphysical realm of cyberspace. We don't need to restrict and limit the commodities, the resources, the assets that we create. So let's try and move beyond these zero-sum mindsets. That's what I would really like to see.
Well, thank you so much.